The wind howled like a wounded beast as snow battered the metal walls of the garage. It was past midnight, and Martin Blake was on the floor, fingers raw, trying to squeeze the last bit of heat from the dying furnace. It coughed, once, then went silent, just like the phone that hadn't rung in weeks, and the mailbox that only delivered red-stamped warnings. He glanced at the small wooden cash box beside his daughter's backpack. Inside were 3 crumpled bills and some change. $47.16. That was all they had left. Not enough for heating oil, not enough for bread and eggs, just enough for a man's pride to bruise a little deeper. He looked across the room where Ellie, his 6-year-old daughter, lay sleeping under a pile of mismatched blankets, hugging a plush moose with one missing eye. Her breath was slow and steady, as if the storm outside didn't exist, as if the world still made sense. Martin ran a hand through his long, unkempt hair and tried not to think of his late wife. Tonight marked the 3rd anniversary of her passing. Cancer didn't wait for paychecks or promotions. He was about to sit down and sharpen a few old tools, anything to keep his hands from trembling when he heard it. A low, throaty rumble. It cut through the storm like thunder on dry ground. Martin froze. No one rode this late in a blizzard. Another growl. Closer. Definitely a motorcycle, a Harley. Old, heavy, American steel. That sound was unmistakable to a man who once rebuilt engines blindfolded for his unit overseas. He reached for the crowbar under the workbench. The front door creaked. Then 3 knocks. He opened it. A figure stood in the snow wrapped in leather and silence, helmeted, boots crusted with ice. One gloved hand rested on the handlebars of a Harley panhead half buried in white powder. The machine hissed, steaming, clearly dying. The figure tilted its head. Fix it. Please. That voice, low, raspy, like wind scraping gravel, but not demanding, not weak either. Martin blinked against the snow. You picked the wrong night, he said. I picked the right man. He should have turned her away. But he didn't. He stepped aside. Bring it in. If that first knock gave you chills, just wait until the engine roars again. Stick around, share this story with someone who still believes in second chances, and let's see what happens when kindness meets horsepower. Martin pushed the garage doors open as wide as they could go, the cold clawing into his bones. The motorcycle limped in like a wounded warhorse, every part groaning. Inside the dim yellow light of the shop, the stranger pulled off her helmet. Martin stilled. The woman beneath had wind-chapped cheeks, a half-healed scar near her brow, and eyes so sharp they looked like they'd been carved from blue ice. She didn't flinch, didn't introduce herself. She only said, "She's all I've got left." Martin glanced down at the bike. The snow had melted off in steaming trails, revealing a battered yet unmistakable frame. Is that a 1952 panhead? She nodded. Original motor. Mostly. Martin whistled low. She's dying. I know. He squatted beside it, fingers brushing the rusted valve covers, the patched fuel line, the chain that looked like it hadn't been loved in a decade. And yet, she shouldn't even be running, he muttered. Neither should I. Martin looked up. For a moment, their eyes locked, 2 ghosts in a garage hiding from the storm. Then he stood. All right, lady. I'll see what I can do. By 2 a.m., the wind outside had turned into a scream. Ellie stirred once, but stayed asleep. Martin worked in silence. He wasn't just fixing the bike, he was listening to it, feeling its flaws. The throttle linkage was bent, the push rods misaligned, the ignition coil needed rewiring. Most of all, the carburetor was leaking like a cracked coffee pot. The woman didn't talk much. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes never leaving the man bent over her steel beast. At some point, Ellie woke and wandered over, rubbing her eyes. Daddy. Who's she? Martin smiled gently. She's just a traveler. The woman knelt. And who are you? She asked. I'm Ellie, the girl said proudly. Daddy can fix anything. Even Mom's music box. Even Mr. Teddy's neck. The woman smiled softly. That's a rare gift. Ellie reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny silver button. It shimmered under the garage light. This is from my mom's favorite coat. It's lucky. She handed it to the woman. The biker hesitated, then closed her gloved fingers around it. Thank you, Ellie. At 3:41 a.m., Martin cranked the ignition. The Harley roared back to life, a deep, angry growl that echoed through the shop like thunder reborn. Martin whispered, "Come on, old girl," and the bike responded steady, loud, proud. The woman stood frozen, eyes shining. Then without a word, she walked over, placed something small on the workbench, pulled on her helmet, and rode into the storm. But not before glancing once over her shoulder at Martin. In the morning, Martin found what she'd left behind. A metal pin shaped like a shield with 2 iron wings and a single letter burned into the center eye. He turned it over in his palm. Delilah, his late wife's best friend, arrived just as the sun began to rise. She saw the pin and went pale. "Where did you get that?" Martin shrugged. "Stranger last night. Fixed her bike." Delilah leaned closer. "Martin, that's the insignia of the Iron Riders. You just saved a ghost out of legend." By morning, the storm had buried everything in white. Snow draped over power lines like frozen laundry, muffling even the sound of distant engines. But inside the garage, the silence was louder. Martin sat at the edge of the workbench, the Iron Rider's insignia pin still in his hand. His fingertips ran over the engraved eye, as if the metal might whisper secrets. It hadn't. Ellie sat nearby with her coloring book and a slice of toast, her eyes occasionally darting up to study her dad's face. She could always tell when something was chewing on his thoughts. "Was she a bad guy, Daddy?" Ellie asked, breaking the silence. Martin glanced up. "No, sweetheart. Just not the kind that usually knocks on our door." He didn't elaborate. He didn't know how to. By afternoon, Martin had nearly convinced himself the whole night had been a dream until the sound of boots crunching over snow jolted him upright. He opened the garage door slowly. There she stood again, the black helmet under her arm, the Harley panhead now purring like a lion parked behind her. Same leather coat, same glacier blue eyes. "Thought I'd bring her back for a tune-up," she said. Martin raised an eyebrow. "You're about 3,000 miles early." She offered a smirk. "You didn't ask for payment." Martin crossed his arms. "I also didn't expect company. Or an Iron Rider in my garage." At that, her gaze sharpened. "You know the symbol?" "Delilah does," Martin replied evenly. "She said you're part of some legendary biker gang." "We're not a gang," the woman corrected, walking past him. "We're a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a family, if you earn your place." She stood by the panhead and gently ran her hand along its tank. "This bike's been with me longer than most people." Martin watched her closely. The way her fingers trembled slightly when she touched the machine. The way her shoulders squared up when someone mentioned the past. "You rode her through last night's storm?" he asked. "I rode her through worse. And survived." She turned toward him. "You fixed her." He shrugged. "Didn't have much choice. She wouldn't shut up until I did." That earned a soft laugh. Then silence, the kind that lingered. Ellie came bounding out from the back room with her moose in hand. "You came back." The woman turned, caught off guard by the child's smile. "I did." "Did you like the button?" "I loved it." Ellie beamed and tugged her closer. "Daddy fixed your bike, didn't he? He's the best fixer in the world." The woman crouched down, meeting Ellie eye to eye. "I believe that." Martin felt something stir in his chest, the feeling of watching someone peel back their armor just long enough to breathe. "Do you have a name?" he asked finally. She stood, took a breath, and said, "Claire." Claire Maddox. It didn't register at first, but Delilah, who had just stepped in with 2 cups of hot cocoa, dropped one. The ceramic shattered. "You're the Claire Maddox." Martin turned confused. "You know her." Delilah nodded slowly, eyes wide. "Claire Maddox, CEO of Maddox Steel, Iron Vixen, one of the most powerful women in the country." Martin blinked. Claire stared at Delilah unimpressed. "Still got a habit of broadcasting, I see." Delilah ignored her and looked at Martin. "You didn't just fix any old Harley, Martin. You resurrected the warhorse of the woman who built half the bridges west of the Mississippi." Claire shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I didn't come here to talk about that," she said. "Then why did you come?" Martin asked gently but firmly. Claire's eyes wandered around the garage, the grease-stained walls, the broken jukebox in the corner, the ancient CB radio. Her gaze settled on Ellie, now humming quietly to herself as she colored. "Because last night, I thought that bike was all I had left. My last ride. My last thread to hold on to." Martin said nothing. "But then, I watched you work. You weren't just fixing it. You were talking to it. Listening. Like it meant something." He nodded slowly. "Machines. They speak. You just have to shut up long enough to hear them." Claire tilted her head. "That's rare." There was silence again. Only this time it was warmer. Delilah cleared her throat, sensing a deeper current. "Well, I'll leave you two to it. I've got some pies to burn." When the door shut behind her, Claire looked at Martin. "You didn't ask for money?" Why, Martin took a long moment before replying. "Because you didn't need someone to fix a machine. You needed someone to believe it still had fight left." She stared at him. No comeback, no wall, just truth between them. As the afternoon waned, Claire knelt beside Ellie again. "Your dad's something special," Ellie grinned. "I know. Does he ever talk about your mom?" "Sometimes. Mostly he just stares at her photo." Claire nodded slowly. She must have been someone worth remembering. Ellie looked down and whispered, "He misses her every night." Martin overheard. His hands gripping the oil can tensed not from pain, but from the fragile way children tell truth, like it's just air. Claire stood up and faced him once more. "I'll be back soon. I've got some things to settle." Martin gave her a look. "Don't bring trouble." She smiled. "I might just bring answers." With that, she pulled her helmet back on, mounted the Harley, and rolled off into the snow, not with the urgency of a fugitive, but the confidence of someone who finally had a reason to return. The blizzard eased the next morning, but the cold lingered like a stubborn ghost. Martin woke before dawn, same as always. Old habits from his army days, when the world could change before sunrise, never really faded. But this morning, something was different. The Harley was still there, not parked outside, inside his garage, covered with a wool tarp, as if Claire had left behind a piece of herself. Martin stood in front of the bike for a long moment, arms crossed, steam rising from his coffee mug. The 52 panhead looked like it had seen every war a machine could see and somehow limped back home. He reached out, ran his fingers along the gas tank. "Why'd she leave you here, girl?" The bike, of course, said nothing. But it didn't need to. Machines, like people, often spoke loudest in silence. By midday, Ellie was seated on a milk crate, wrapped in 2 sweaters, holding her sketch pad, and scribbling what she claimed was a warrior bike with fire wings. Martin was half under the Harley, coaxing its carburetor back into balance. She tilted her head. "Why do you talk to the engine like it's alive?" Martin reached for a socket wrench. "Because sometimes it is." "Like Mr. Teddy?" she asked, holding up her stitched moose with pride. "Exactly like Mr. Teddy," he said with a chuckle. "If you treat them like junk, they forget how to run. But if you treat them like they matter..." "They remember," Ellie finished. Martin gave her a wink. "Always." Claire didn't return that day, nor the next. But Martin didn't stop working on the bike. He wasn't fixing it for her anymore. He was fixing it because it deserved to live. Because something about it reminded him of himself. Bent frame, worn heart, but still capable of roaring if someone just believed hard enough. He replaced the intake seals using old parts he'd been saving for someday, rewired the ignition coil, polished the worn chrome by hand, adjusted the clutch with the precision of a surgeon and the reverence of a priest. Each time he twisted a bolt or tapped the timing, he remembered pieces of his own past, a Humvee engine brought back to life under enemy fire, an old Mustang he and his wife once rebuilt for fun, the sound of Ellie's first laugh echoing through this very garage. This wasn't about steel and spark. It was about memory, about keeping something alive because letting it die felt like giving up on everything. On the third night, just as the wind picked up again, headlights cut across the snow. Ellie pressed her face to the window. "It's her." Martin stepped out, wiping his hands with a rag, heart oddly fast. Claire pulled in, removed her helmet, and stood in the headlights, like a figure from an old western, fierce, cold, and beautiful in a way that came from carrying burdens instead of makeup. "You left your ride," Martin said. Deadpan. I knew she was in good hands. Martin glanced toward the panhead. "She's got more fight in her than I thought." Claire walked over slowly, her boots crunching the frozen gravel. She always did. I just forgot how to hear it. They stood there a moment. No words, just breath clouds rising, and the quiet hum of recognition. Then Claire stepped closer to the bike. Martin peeled back the tarp. The Harley gleamed. Not showroom clean, no, that would have been an insult. She gleamed like a soldier returning from war scars, polished, pride intact. Claire knelt down and stared at the engine like it was a relic. Martin spoke softly. "New jets. Cleaned up the cams. Your timing was off by 3 degrees. She was fighting herself." Claire nodded, her voice just above a whisper. "So was I." Ellie skipped over and handed Claire a small square of paper. A drawing, the same one she'd been working on all week. The panhead surrounded by flames, with 2 angel wings stretched wide. Claire stared at it, then folded it gently and tucked it into her coat pocket like it was worth more than any stock certificate she'd ever signed. "You're good with her," Claire said. Ellie Martin smiled. "She runs on peanut butter and questions." "I meant the bike," Claire said, smirking. Martin looked at her. "I only fix what wants to be fixed." They stayed late into the night, the garage warm with the space heater Delilah had snuck in. Claire sat beside the bike, nursing a thermos of black coffee. Ellie drifted to sleep under Martin's coat in the corner, her moose tucked beneath her arm. Claire sipped, thoughtful. "I used to ride just to feel something. Noise win the danger. It drowned things out." Martin nodded. "And now I ride because it's the only time I feel like I'm not running from something." She looked at him. "You ever run? I did once," Martin said. "But it didn't take." Claire smiled, a tired but genuine thing. "Where'd you learn to do all this?" Martin shrugged. "Some in the army, some in life. Most from watching machines fall apart the same way people do. Quiet at first. Then, all at once." He paused. "But you learned that with the right tools. And enough patience. Even broken things can run again." Claire stared at him like he'd handed her a map she didn't know she needed. "You don't talk much," she said. "Neither do engines." Martin replied. "They just need someone who listens." Claire stood. "I'll be back." "Soon." Martin looked at her. "You always say that." She stepped forward, closer than before. Her gloved hand reached out and squeezed his gently. "This time." "I mean it." And then, without another word, she walked into the snow, leaving only the faint scent of motor oil and winter behind her. Martin stood still, watching until the night swallowed her. Then he looked down at the Harley and whispered, She's coming back, old girl. And when she does, we'll both be ready. The snow melted slowly that week, reluctant to loosen its grip on the battered North Dakota town. Roofs still groaned under weight. Roads remained half buried. But in Martin's garage, something had begun to thaw faster than ice the silence. Claire hadn't returned yet, but her presence hadn't left. The Harley panhead sat gleaming in the corner, now covered with a soft navy cloth Ellie had insisted on using because it looks like a blanket a hero would wear. Martin worked like a man with a purpose again. He whistled, cleaned tools, even fixed the old neon sign over the garage door, the one that hadn't lit up since before Ellie was born. Now it glowed a faint red, Blake Auto and Sons. The and Sons was a leftover from when Martin dreamed of passing it on to a growing family. Life, it seemed, had other plans. That morning, Delilah dropped by with 2 coffees and a rolled-up cinnamon bun that Ellie devoured like a puppy with a chew toy. She leaned on the counter while Martin organized bolts into old baby food jars. "So, you gonna tell me what's up with the mystery woman? Or just keep polishing bolts till the snow melts in July?" Martin didn't look up. She needed help. I helped. Delilah gave him a sideways smirk. And then she left again. She said she'd be back. Delilah raised her brows. "You believe that Martin tightened a jar lid, don't you?" There was a pause. Then Delilah slid something across the table. Martin blinked. It was the Iron Rider's pin Claire had left behind. But something was different. Delilah had mounted it on a black leather patch, framed it with a gold-stitched border. The symbol looked even more menacing now. 2 iron wings flared out a blazing eye in the center, like a silent threat or a vow. "Where'd you get this?" Martin asked. "Same place everyone in town gets gossip," Delilah said. "Facebook and my cousin Jenny's mouth." She leaned in. "Martin, that patch doesn't just belong to the Iron Riders. That design specifically, it's reserved for their inner circle. The ones they call the First Flame. Rumor is there are less than 5 people in the whole country who wear it." Martin stared at it. "And Claire's one of them." "She's not just one of them," Delilah said, voice lowering. "She's the damn spark that started the fire." That afternoon, Martin took Ellie into town to pick up a new box of spark plugs and a gallon of milk. The hardware store clerk, a Vietnam vet named Richie, tipped his cap and nodded toward the panhead parked by the garage's bay window. "Been hearing some stories," Blake Richie said, "about a panhead that growled through the worst snow this county's seen in a decade." "That true?" Martin half smiled. "She growled all right." Richie leaned closer. "Word is, she belonged to a Maddox, one of those Maddoxes." "That true, too?" Martin didn't answer. He just placed a $10 bill on the counter. Back at the garage, Martin found Ellie crouched by the Harley again, whispering to it like she did with stray dogs and baby birds. "I told her you'd fix her," she whispered. "Told her Daddy can fix anything." Martin knelt beside her. "She's a strong one." Ellie looked up, like Claire. Martin hesitated. "Yeah, like Claire." Ellie stood and rummaged through a drawer near the back wall. She emerged with something in her hand, a small, dusty box from Martin's army days. She opened it and revealed a faded cloth patch, an eagle gripping a wrench in its talons. "What's this?" she asked. Martin swallowed hard. "That was mine. From Afghanistan, before you were born. Can I keep it?" He looked at her, then slowly nodded. "Sure." She placed it gently next to the Iron Rider's patch that Delilah had brought over. Side by side, they looked right, like they belonged together. Later that evening, Martin sat alone, flipping through an old notebook, one where he'd sketched garage renovations he could never afford. A wider bay, an office, a little play area for Ellie, dreams on paper. He was halfway through a page about motorcycle lifts when he heard tires crunching snow. Not a Harley this time. A black SUV, sleek, tinted. Not from around here. Martin stepped outside, rag in hand, as the door opened, and a man in a tailored gray coat stepped out. Too polished. Too clean. Mr. Blake Martin didn't answer. The man extended a business card. Ethan Rowe, Senior Asset Acquisitions, Linhart and Shaw Holdings. Martin read it, then looked up. I'm not selling. You haven't heard my offer yet. I don't need to. Ethan smiled tightly. You have 14 days left on your mortgage. My firm recently acquired the lien from North Dakota Savings and Trust. I'm here to make you a generous pre-foreclosure offer. Martin wiped his hand slowly. Tell Claire Maddox her people are getting bolder. At that, Ethan's smile faltered just for a beat. I don't work for Maddox Steel. Quite the opposite, actually. Martin folded the card in half and tucked it in his pocket. Then you're standing on the wrong land. Ethan looked around. It's barely a garage. Martin looked toward the Harley. That's where you're wrong. That night, Ellie was already asleep, but Martin couldn't rest. He stood by the Harley, running a thumb over the new patch Delilah had stitched into an old biker vest she found in storage. Iron Riders. Veteran's Eagle. Side by side. He stared at the two symbols, past and present, and understood what they meant now. Claire hadn't just left a machine. She'd left a question. And maybe maybe. She was waiting to see what kind of man would answer. She came back on a Wednesday. No warning. No call. Just the unmistakable growl of her Harley slicing through the late afternoon stillness, echoing off the hills like thunder on steel. Martin stepped out of the garage before the bike had even rolled to a stop. He wiped his hands on a rag, then froze when he saw her. Not because she had returned, but because this time, Claire Maddox wasn't hiding. No helmet. No goggles. No pretense. Her long auburn hair was tied back, wind-tousled and proud. She wore the same battered leather jacket, but this time it was unzipped, revealing a black turtleneck and a silver pendant shaped like an iron flame. There was power in the way she stood next to the bike, not like someone protecting a secret, but like someone done running from it. Ellie was the first to move. She barreled out of the shop door and ran straight to Claire, her boots slipping in the slush. You came back? I told Daddy you would. Claire knelt, catching Ellie in a hug so tight it startled both of them. Her voice cracked as she said, I missed you, little one. Ellie leaned back and studied her face. You smell like winter and motor oil. Claire laughed, a sound so genuine and human that Martin found himself blinking away something he couldn't quite explain. Do you want to see what I drew for you? Ellie asked, tugging her hand. In a minute, Claire said softly. I need to talk to your dad first. Inside the garage, the fire in the old barrel stove crackled. Martin poured 2 mugs of black coffee, sliding one across the workbench without a word. Claire took a long sip before speaking. My name's been on every boardroom wall from San Francisco to D.C. I've sat across from senators, oil magnates, and half the tech giants in the country. Martin nodded. Sounds exhausting. She smirked. It is. And none of it scared me. Her voice lowered. But this place, that bike Ellie's drawing pinned to your wall, that scared the hell out of me. Martin didn't interrupt. I spent years building Maddox steel from a salvage yard and 1 welding torch. I rode with the Iron Riders because they taught me something the boardroom never could, how to stay upright when everything wants you to fall. Martin raised an eyebrow. You run both. Claire nodded. Officially, I'm CEO of a $9 billion enterprise. Unofficially, I'm the Iron Vixen senior officer of the Riders. They're not just my crew. They're my blood. Martin leaned forward. So why here? Why now? Claire looked toward the panhead, her panhead resting like a lioness in the corner. Because the world I built doesn't feel like home anymore. But that night in the middle of the storm, you didn't ask for my name, my title, or my money. She turned to him. You just heard the machine. Martin held her gaze, because it needed fixing. No, Claire said. Because I did. Delilah arrived not long after holding a pie tin and wearing an expression halfway between suspicion and something softer. Look who rode in with the thaw, she said, setting the tin down. Back to reclaim her steel steed. Claire smiled. Back to deliver a thank you. And a proposal. Martin stiffened. What kind of proposal? Claire reached into her jacket and unfolded a set of blueprints, thick parchment hand-sketched, annotated in clean, blocky writing. Across the top, one phrase, Wolf's Refuge. Claire looked between Martin and Delilah. Halfway homes don't work. Shelters are underfunded. Skills programs for veterans are undercut every year. She tapped the plans. But what if this place wasn't just a garage? What if it became a sanctuary for bikers, vets, foster kids, people trying to get back up after the world knocks them down? Delilah's mouth parted slightly. You're talking about a charity, Claire shook her head. I'm talking about a movement, taught by those who've lived it, run by hands that know how to rebuild, not just repair. Martin stared at the blueprint. His name wasn't on it. But there in the corner was Ellie's crayon drawing the panhead with fire wings. He looked up. You're serious? Claire nodded. Dead serious. I've already cleared the zoning issues. The Maddox Foundation will cover the startup costs. You'd run the mechanical side. I'd handle the infrastructure. Delilah can run community outreach. Delilah scoffed. I'm not getting involved in local food co-op with government grants and veteran farming initiatives, Claire added like she'd rehearsed it. Delilah blinked. Okay, I'm listening. That night, as the snow fell again in gentle flurries, Claire sat with Ellie near the stove. The little girl was showing her how to roast mini marshmallows on a bent clothes hanger. Claire, in her $1,000 boots and $1 million posture, looked completely out of place, and yet completely at home. Martin watched from across the room. You sure about this? He asked finally. Claire didn't look away from the marshmallow. No, she turned her voice lower. But I'm sure about you. Martin folded his arms. I'm not a savior, Claire. I'm not a leader. I'm just a mechanic with a daughter and too many memories. She stood and walked to him. You're more than that. You're the kind of man people follow without needing to be told. You fixed something most would have tossed. That bike, and maybe more. Martin didn't move, but something in his eyes softened. You're not asking for help, are you? Claire shook her head. I'm asking for partnership. A long pause. Then Ellie yawned, rubbing her eyes. Claire, can you stay tonight? Martin opened his mouth to answer, but Claire beat him to it. She looked at Martin, waiting. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just took his coat off, walked over to the couch and laid it out for her like a man offering shelter, not just from the cold, but from everything. Morning came soft and quiet, with sunlight bleeding gently through the garage's dusty windows. Ellie was still asleep on the cot by the stove, her mousse tucked under her chin. The scent of coffee mixed with motor oil lingered in the air, a strange, comforting perfume that had come to define this little refuge. Claire stood by the workbench examining the framed patches on the wall. The one Delilah had mounted the Iron Rider's insignia sat beside Martin's old Army Eagle. 2 lives, 2 wars, 1 garage. Martin was already up, of course, sipping coffee in silence, his eyes on the frosted fields beyond the window. She didn't speak at first. Neither did he. Some conversations didn't begin with words. They began with presence, and presence was something Martin Blake had in quiet abundance. Finally, she said, I should have told you sooner. About who I was, About all of it. Martin didn't look at her. You told me what mattered. That gave her pause. What did I tell you? He turned slowly, his voice low. That you were tired. That the noise wasn't working anymore. That you were looking for something real. Claire leaned against the table. I've built empires from blueprints and steel. But this, she gestured around the garage. This is the first place I've felt human in years. Martin met her eyes. Then don't run. Later that morning, Delilah barged in with her usual flair, cheeks red from the cold arms full of paperwork and sass. Martin Blake, if you're going to run a nonprofit, you're going to need permits, waivers, and for the love of all things, legal, a proper address. Claire smirked. I already started the 501c3 application. Maddox Steel has attorneys who can... Delilah cut her off with a hand. Honey, I've seen your lawyers. They wear $2,000 shoes and don't know what a carburetor is. We're going to do this our way. Community first. Locally filed. Claire blinked. You're joining us. Delilah rolled her eyes. If I don't, this place will be overrun with buzzwords and motivational posters. Someone has to keep it honest. Martin gave a rare smile. You're the conscience. I'm the brakes, she replied, rifling through her papers. But good news never came alone. That afternoon, the mail truck dropped off a thin envelope with a government stamp. Martin opened it slowly. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened. Claire noticed. What is it? He handed it to her without a word. Final foreclosure notice. Eviction in 7 days. Claire's eyes flicked through the lines. I thought you had 2 weeks left. Martin exhaled hard. Apparently someone pushed it forward. Delilah snatched the paper. That's illegal without proper notice. Claire's expression darkened. Linhart and Shaw. I bet my board seat they're behind this. Martin sat down, rubbing his temples. I don't care about the land, but I do care about the garage. This is Ellie's home. He looked up at Claire. I fought for things that mattered. I can't believe I have to fight for this now. Ellie had wandered in quietly and stood near the door holding her moose. Her voice was small, but it carried. Daddy, are we gonna lose the garage? The room froze. Martin stood and walked toward her, kneeling to her level. We'll figure something out. Her lip trembled. But this is where Mommy's picture hangs, and where the Harley sleeps, and where you fixed Mr. Teddy's arm. She looked around. If we lose this, where do we go? Claire knelt beside Martin. Her hand found Ellie's. You're not losing anything, sweetheart, she said softly. Not if I have anything to say about it. That night, after Ellie fell asleep in Claire's lap, Martin and Delilah sat outside by a rusted oil drum fire. She's good for you, Delilah said. Martin poked at the embers. She's chaos. She's change, Delilah corrected. There's a difference. He said nothing for a while. Then, you think this place can really become something more? A refuge, Delilah sipped from her mug. With the right people? Yeah, I do. Martin looked back at the garage, at the light inside, at Claire holding Ellie, both of them half asleep. I used to think all I had left was the past, he whispered. Now I'm not so sure. Delilah smiled. That's the first hopeful thing I've heard you say since you came back from Kabul. The next morning, Claire made pancakes. Burnt edges, way too much syrup. Ellie declared them perfect. Martin sat beside her, still in his grease-stained shirt, watching the two of them laugh over a misshapen Mickey Mouse pancake. I have a proposal, Claire said, setting down her fork. A real one. Martin raised an eyebrow. Not a blueprint this time. No, she said. Something more dangerous. She walked to the workbench and pulled a small box from her leather satchel. Inside was a set of keys. To what he asked. To the Maddox Foundation's emergency trust for Wolf's Refuge. Martin stared at her. "You're serious?" She nodded. "This garage saved me. Now let's save others." He looked at the keys, then at Ellie, then back at Claire. "You sure you're ready to stop running?" She stepped closer. "Only if you're ready to stop hiding." The air shifted, and without speaking another word, Martin reached out, closed her hand around the keys, and held it there, not as a promise, but as a beginning. The sun dipped behind the frost-bitten trees, casting long shadows over the garage. Winter's grip was loosening, but its chill still crept through the walls, like an unwelcome memory. Inside, the warmth of the stove kept the cold at bay, but not the weight pressing on Martin's chest. They had 6 days left. 6 days until the notice became reality. Until the place that had become both sanctuary and battlefield would be stripped away by signatures and silence. Martin sat on a stool in the corner of the shop, staring at an old metal cabinet he hadn't opened in years. Dust clung to it like stubborn regret. The faded label on the front read, "ComSet. 1st Marines, Blake M." His fingers hovered above the latch. Claire stood nearby holding a mug of black coffee, watching him carefully. She said nothing, not yet. She knew enough to let a man fight his own ghosts. He opened the cabinet. Inside was a box, and inside the box was the past. A handheld CB radio olive green scratched from desert storms and engine grease, a tangle of frayed wires, and a dog tag that didn't belong to him. Martin picked up the radio slowly, like he was lifting a fragile piece of himself. Claire moved closer. "Is that military issue?" Martin nodded. "We called it the Howler. It wasn't much, but when satellites failed or the comms were jammed, this thing carried voices farther than you'd believe." He turned it over, inspecting the cracked knobs and missing antenna cap. "You think it still works?" she asked. Martin gave a dry chuckle. "Most things that look dead just need the right hands." He set it on the bench and started cleaning the dust from the terminals. Ellie came out in her pajamas, dragging her moose by one arm. Her hair stuck up on one side, sleep still clinging to her eyes. "Daddy, why are you fixing a walkie-talkie?" Martin looked over his shoulder. "It's a special one." "Can I help?" He hesitated, then handed her a soft brush. "Clean the battery contacts." Gently. She went to work like a surgeon. Claire smiled from behind her mug. "You've got an assistant." Martin nodded. "Best I've ever had." As the minutes passed, the shop filled with something it hadn't in a long time: purpose. By midnight, the CB radio was humming again. Just barely. The speaker crackled with static, the kind that sounded like ghosts whispering through wind. Martin adjusted the frequency dial one hand, steady the other, gripping a list of codes he hadn't looked at in years. Old call signs, unit channels, and fallback hails that only a handful of people would still recognize. Claire leaned forward. "You're really going to try to reach them?" Martin didn't answer right away. "Then I don't need 100 men. I need 5 who remember what it meant to ride for something bigger than themselves." He pressed the button. "This is Wolf. Come in. Anyone out there?" "This is Wolf. Garage is red tagged. 6 days to clear. Repeat 6 days. If you're still riding. If you still believe. Now's the time." He let go. The static returned. Claire exhaled slowly. "You think anyone's still listening?" Martin stared at the radio. "I don't know." An hour passed. Then 2. Delilah had gone home. Ellie had fallen asleep, curled up in an army blanket. Claire stayed perched on the edge of the bench, sipping lukewarm coffee, eyes fixed on Martin, not judging, not questioning. Just present. At 3:12 a.m., the radio hissed. Then Wolf, "This is Widow. Heard you loud. Location confirmed. We ride at dawn." Martin froze. Claire sat up straight. "Did she say?" Widow Martin nodded. Maxine Ray. Claire's lips parted in disbelief. She's still alive. Martin turned to her, eyes flickering with something like wonder. She's more than alive. She's on her bike. He picked up the radio again, his voice tighter this time. Widow confirmed strength. A long pause. Then, first 5, ready. Chapter, leads notified. The pack rides. Claire stood, arms folded. That's impossible. Maxine left the riders years ago. Went off grid. Martin looked down at the radio. Then why did she answer? Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, slow and strange, like something long forgotten had just clicked back into place. She heard something worth riding for. The next morning, Martin didn't sleep. He worked. He reinforced the garage door hinges, cleared space in the rear lot, checked the propane tanks. The place wasn't just a garage anymore. It was a landing zone, a last stand, a beacon. Ellie helped make signs. Claire made calls to every biker-friendly diner, gas station, and auto yard within 100 miles. Delilah arrived by noon with a stack of flyers. Guess what, boys and girls, I got us a permit for an emergency community meeting. We're doing this legit. Martin raised an eyebrow. You bribed someone, didn't you? Delilah grinned. I inspired them. With pie. That night, as the temperature dropped again, and headlights danced along distant roads, Martin stood at the edge of the property radio. In one hand, Ellie asleep against his shoulder. Claire walked up beside him, watching the horizon. You think they'll come? She asked softly. Martin nodded once. They already are. She looked at the way he held his daughter, steady, weathered, unshakable, and something deep inside her settled. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight alone. The snow began to fall again, quiet and slow, coating the roof in a thin white blanket. Then in the distance, the faint rumble of engines. Claire's breath caught. Martin. He looked up, eyes narrowing. They're early. And somewhere deep in the garage behind them, the old CB radio hissed again. Wolf, this is Widow. The road's ours. You called, we answered. The snow had stopped, but the air still bit like broken glass. The kind of cold that cut through denim and denim dreams. But nothing could silence the sound coming over the hill. Harleys. 5 of them. Low, loud, proud. Their headlights pierced through the early dawn fog like spears of fire, and their engines didn't purr. They howled. Martin stood in front of the garage, arms crossed, face unreadable. Beside him, Claire adjusted the cuff of her leather jacket, her eyes locked on the ridge. Delilah stepped out onto the porch, clutching a thermos of hot cider and muttering, Well, I'll be damned. And little Ellie. She stood barefoot on the steps, wrapped in Martin's oversized coat, clutching her moose like a general holding his battle flag. Her eyes sparkled. They're here, she whispered. The first rider crested the hill and slowed as she approached the driveway, her tires slicing through the slush with surgical precision. She wore black-on-black leather, her silver braid whipping behind her like a battle banner. Her helmet was matte, her visor down, but Martin recognized the posture. Maxine Ray, the Iron Widow. The other 4 followed in a diamond formation, 2 men, 1 woman, and a grizzled giant with a beard so thick it looked like he'd swallowed a badger. Their jackets bore patches from across the country, Wyoming, Michigan, Nevada, and one with nothing but the word, Ghost. When the engines finally cut, silence fell again, but this time it was the reverent kind. Maxine stepped off her bike, removed her helmet, and locked eyes with Martin. You still got that habit of radioing without permission? Wolf Martin grinned faintly. You still got that habit of answering anyway. Widow. She approached, slow and deliberate, like a queen returning to the battlefield she once ruled. When she reached him, she stopped, studied him for a moment, then without warning, hugged him. Tight. Fierce. like two survivors clinging to a shared language no one else understood. "I heard your voice," she murmured. "Didn't realize how much I'd missed it." Claire stepped forward. Maxine turned and froze. There was a flicker of something unspoken between them, admiration, resentment, perhaps even guilt, but it passed like a shadow under the sun. Vixen Maxine said neutral. Widow Claire replied, "You're writing again?" Claire nodded. "I never stopped. Just got distracted." Maxine gave a slow nod. "Well, you sure know how to pick your refuges." She looked toward the garage, toward the little girl peeking from behind a post. "Who's the sprite?" Martin stepped beside Ellie and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "This is my daughter Ellie, the true boss of this operation." Ellie stepped forward, nervous but brave. She pointed at Maxine's vest, at the faded symbol stitched into the leather. "You're one of them." Maxine crouched low, her eyes level with Ellie's. "One of who, sweetheart? One of the people who don't give up." Maxine blinked, then smiled. "You got that right, kid." Inside the garage, the 5 riders spread out like they belonged there, because in a way they did. The air filled with stories, quick tales of blown engines and back-road rescues, whispered names of lost friends, scars swapped like old war medals. Delilah made chili. Claire brewed coffee strong enough to restart a heart. And Martin, he watched, observed, absorbed. He had called and they had come. But it wasn't just that. They had remembered. Later, Maxine stood in front of the bulletin board, where the plans for Wolf's Refuge were pinned. "Claire told me what you're building here." Martin joined her, wiping his hands on a rag. "Not building, hoping to." She studied the sketches. Garage, sleeping quarters, training bay, kitchen, classroom. "Hell, Martin, you're not building a shelter. You're building a revolution. I'm just trying to keep people from falling through the cracks." She turned to him. "Then, you're doing the Lord's work," he chuckled. "More like Ellie's work." That evening, as the sun dipped low, the 5 riders sat around the oil drum fire pit outside the garage. Claire and Martin sat on the tailgate of the old Chevy, their legs dangling, shoulders occasionally brushing. Ellie handed out marshmallows with solemn seriousness, as if rationing treasure. "You know what we need?" Delilah asked, poking at the fire. "A miracle," Claire offered. "A damn name," Delilah said. "If this place is going to be more than a ghost story, it needs an identity. A heartbeat." Martin glanced at Ellie, who was twirling slowly in her oversized coat. "She already gave us one," he said. Claire looked at him. "Wolf's Refuge," he said. "Because even the lone ones deserve a place to come home." Maxine raised her mug. "To the wolf and to the pack." The others followed suit. To the pack, they echoed. And for the first time since the eviction notice arrived, Martin felt the weight in his chest loosen, not vanish, but shift, because now the fight wasn't his alone. Before turning in, Ellie climbed onto Martin's lap. "Daddy yay, bug." She looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "Are they staying?" Martin glanced around at the 5 bikes, the laughter by the fire, the voices rising like music. He kissed her forehead. "They've already stayed." By sunrise, the sound of engines had faded into the quiet hum of purpose. The 5 riders remained patching the walls, organizing tools, reinforcing the old furnace. Claire coordinated calls. Delilah handled paperwork, like a battle commander organizing triage. Even Ellie had tasks sweeping sawdust and handing out cups of cocoa like a field nurse in the middle of a campaign. But the peace wouldn't last long, because trouble, real sharp-suited paper-sign trouble, was already on the road. It came just after noon. A black Lincoln SUV pulled up to the edge of the property tires, crunching over gravel like bones under boots. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies stepped out first, stern-faced and unreadable. Then came the man behind it all. Gregory Shaw. His suit was charcoal gray, too tailored for this town. His boots were clean despite the snow, hair slicked back like a man trying to hide the oil in his soul. He held a leather briefcase like it was a weapon. Claire stiffened the moment she saw him. Martin stepped outside, jaw tight, wiping his hands on a rag, same way he had the day his wife died, when there was nothing left to fix. Afternoon, Martin said, voice even. Shaw offered a smirk. Mr. Blake, Gregory Shaw, Linhart and Shaw. Holdings. I believe we've spoken indirectly. Through threats and foreclosure notices, yeah. We've spoken. The deputies stood to the side, hands near their belts. Shaw opened his briefcase and pulled out a glossy folder. You're trespassing on property now legally scheduled for acquisition, he said calmly. I'm here to offer you a final courtesy. Martin didn't take the folder. Not interested. You haven't even looked at the numbers, Shaw said, stepping forward. It's a generous buyout enough to relocate, rebuild somewhere else. Somewhere with fewer liabilities and less noise. Martin's eyes narrowed. You mean less people? Claire appeared beside him. She's behind this, isn't she? She said coldly. Shaw smiled. Claire. Still allergic to capitalism, I see. Delilah stepped out onto the porch. Is that a weasel or just his cologne? One of the riders, Ghost the giant with the beard, crossed his arms and stood by the bikes. The message was clear: one wrong move, and Suits would meet Chrome. But Shaw was used to resistance. He stepped closer to Martin and offered the pen. You've got 48 hours. Sign this and the pressure disappears. No public humiliation. No sheriff's tape. No trucks showing up to haul away memories. Martin stared at the contract for a long moment, then turned and handed it to Ellie. Want to see what someone thinks our life is worth? She opened it, eyes wide at the numbers. That's a lot of money, Daddy. Martin nodded. Sure is. Ellie looked up. But it's not enough for Mama's picture, or Mr. Teddy, or the Harley. Martin looked at Shaw. You heard her. He tore the contract in half. And again, until it blew away in the wind, like ash from a funeral. The reaction was immediate. Shaw's jaw tensed. This isn't over. Claire stepped between them, eyes cold as steel. You're right. It's just beginning. He turned to the deputies. Do your job. But they didn't move. One of them, an older man with crow's feet and worn boots, looked at Martin, then at Ellie, then back at Shaw. We're not evicting anyone today. Shaw's voice dropped. You're under legal obligation and we're under moral obligation, the deputy said. And frankly, Mr. Shaw, the optics of dragging a single dad and his daughter into the snow don't sit well with me. Shaw's fists clenched. Martin stepped forward. You don't get to bulldoze people and call it business. Then quietly, Ellie asked, why do the good people always have to leave? The whole yard went silent. Maxine set her wrench down beside the front tire she'd been working on and walked over, her voice low but commanding. They don't baby girl, she said. Not anymore. Shaw turned, his mask cracking. Fine. We'll go through the courts, and when the judge rules, we'll be back. He climbed into his SUV. The deputies didn't follow. They stayed behind like men who had chosen a side. Claire watched the vehicle vanish down the road, then let out a slow breath. Martin knelt beside Ellie. You okay? She nodded, but her voice was small. He wanted to take everything. Martin touched her cheek. But we still have each other. And the Harley, she added. And the Harley, he agreed with a smile. That night, the fire burned hotter than usual. The 5 riders sat around the barrel sipping cider, polishing tools, laughing louder than they had in years. Martin sat with Claire near the steps. Ellie was curled between them, dozing peacefully. Delilah read through zoning laws by flashlight. I found a loophole, she said triumphantly. Shaw didn't file for a full structural review. That buys us 2 more weeks minimum. Claire looked at Martin. We need more than 2 weeks. He nodded. We need a miracle. Maxine spoke up from the fire. Maybe we don't need a miracle. Everyone turned to her. Maybe we just need 100 bikes. Rolling down the road, letting the town and the courts know this place matters. Claire raised an eyebrow. You think we can get that many? Maxine sipped her cider. If we ask the right way. Martin looked at the old CB radio glowing inside the garage, and he smiled. It began with a whisper, a hiss of static on the CB radio, then a voice, scratchy but clear, widow to all chapters. This is not a drill. Wolf's Refuge needs riders. You know what to do. Maxine stood beside the garage wall, her hand still on the transmitter, eyes fixed on the glowing orange light that flickered as her words rippled across frequencies, both old and sacred. The room held its breath. Martin said nothing, but his chest rose slowly, like someone preparing to stand through a storm. Claire glanced at him, her hand brushing his for the briefest second. In the days that followed, the world shifted. The first bikes arrived at dawn, a pair of brothers from Iowa, both veterans, both on matching matte black Sportsters. They brought tools, canned food, and a portable generator. Next came a retired mechanic from New Mexico, his knuckles gnarled like tree roots, riding a shovelhead chopper older than some states. Then a woman named Loretta from Montana, who rode with a German shepherd in a sidecar and told Ellie bedtime stories about wolves and warrior queens. By the 4th day, the field beside Martin's garage had been transformed. Tent poles pierced the snow. Sleeping bags unrolled on flattened hay. Campfires glowed against the dark, like stars scattered across a battlefield. Delilah called it the most beautiful logistical nightmare she'd ever seen. Ellie called it the biker circus. Martin simply called it hope. On the 6th day, the last legal day before Shaw's deadline, the town finally noticed. Local reporters showed up first, wide-eyed and confused recording interviews on outdated tripods, while bikers recited poetry, welded wheelchair ramps, and handed out chili. Then came drone cameras. Then TikTok. A biker named Chainsaw, who despite the name was a gentle vegan who carved wooden toys, went viral overnight for teaching Ellie how to fix a carburetor while baking sourdough on a camp stove. Claire's inbox flooded. Calls from donors, curious press. Even a U.S. senator's aide asked if Wolf's Refuge could host a veterans job training pilot. But the true moment came on the final morning. The snow had returned overnight, thick white, heavy as silence. But at 8:17 a.m., a distant sound echoed across the frozen fields. Engines, not 5, not 10. A storm of thunder, a roar of revival. Martin stepped out into the cold, Ellie on his shoulders, Claire at his side. They watched as headlights crested the hills like fireflies on a battlefield. 10, 20, 30. By the time the front riders reached the gate, they were surrounded on every side. Over 100 motorcycles. Iron riders from 11 states. Solo riders. Forgotten chapters. Entire families. Each carrying not just leather and grit, but loyalty. The lead bike stopped directly in front of Martin. Claire stepped forward, mouth slightly open. Benny. The man removed his helmet, bald, tattooed eyes bright with mischief. I told you I'd ride for you, Maddox. All you had to do was ask. Claire hugged him hard. Maxine joined them. You brought the whole damn West Coast. More coming, Benny said, gesturing over his shoulder. Arizona, Texas, and a couple of quiet ghosts from Canada. You called. We came. He turned to Martin. You must be Wolf. Martin nodded. Benny grinned. Hell of a growl you've got, brother. By 10:00 a.m., the sheriff arrived. Not in uniform. No sirens. Just an old pickup truck and a folded piece of paper. Martin met him halfway down the drive. The sheriff handed him the paper, a stay order. temporary suspension of eviction. Filed that morning. Signed by a local judge who had seen the drone footage. And the sea of bikes. We're not going to be the town that boots out 100 veterans, are we? The sheriff asked. Martin didn't answer, just smiled. Shaw arrived an hour later. Black SUV, same pressed suit. But this time, he wasn't smiling. He opened the car door, saw the crowd, the media, the riders, and froze. Delilah walked up to him holding a fresh cup of coffee. Careful where you step. Asphalt's got a soul today. Shaw ignored her and stormed up to Martin. This is a circus. You think this changes anything? Claire stepped beside Martin. It changes everything. You're obstructing? You're outnumbered, Maxine interrupted, stepping in from the side. Shaw scanned the field, saw the patches, the faces, the fire in their stances. And for once, he backed down. He turned to Claire, venom in his voice. This isn't over. Claire crossed her arms. You're right. It's only just beginning. He left without another word. And just like that, the war for the garage ended not in blood, but in presence, in loyalty, in unity. At sunset, Claire gathered the riders standing atop an old oil barrel. She pointed to the garage. This place isn't mine. It isn't Martin's. It belongs to every soul who thought they were too broken to be useful again. She pointed to the fields. This is our wolf's refuge. And if you ever find yourself lost again, tired, hungry, forgotten, there will be a fire here, and a wrench, and someone who remembers your name. The riders roared in approval. Ellie cheered the loudest. And as the sun disappeared behind the white hills, Martin walked to the edge of the garage, looked at Claire, and whispered, You brought the world to my doorstep. She took his hand. No, you built the door. I just reminded them how to find it. The snow melted slowly over the next few days, revealing patches of brown earth beneath the tire tracks and boot prints. The field beside the garage, once barren and silent, now looked like the beginnings of a village. Tents gave way to lumber, toolkits replaced saddlebags, and blueprints became reality. They called it the sanctuary build. Maxine scrawled it in chalk on the side of the garage with a grin, and somehow it stuck. It began with a concrete pour. Riders laid the first slab at sunrise. Claire insisted on doing it without a press crew or news cameras. This isn't for headlines, she told them. It's for healing. Martin stood with Ellie by his side, watching as volunteers, former soldiers, road warriors, mechanics, even an ex-professor from Denver worked like bees in a hive. Walls began to rise. So did something deeper. Inside the garage, the original office was being gutted. Claire held a clipboard and wore a tool belt, which Delilah mocked mercilessly. I've seen poodles more convincing as construction leads, she said. Claire smirked. Tell that to the 2 grants I secured before breakfast. Still doesn't explain the rhinestone hammer, Delilah muttered. Martin passed by carrying a stack of reclaimed planks. I'm staying out of this, Claire pointed at him. Coward? He winked. Later that afternoon, Martin found Ellie and Loretta, the sidecar-riding grandmother from Montana, painting signs together. One read, Wolf's Refuge Mechanics, Mentors, Miracles. Ellie added a paw print in the corner. That's for the wolf in Daddy. Martin knelt beside her. I thought you were in charge. I am, she said with authority. But wolves listen to their pack. Martin swallowed a knot in his throat. Yeah, they do. That night, they held the first official meeting of the Sanctuary Council. It wasn't fancy, just a circle of folding chairs around a fire pit. Claire, Martin, Maxine, Delilah, and a handful of chapter leaders. Claire unfolded the master blueprint across her lap. It was smudged from the ride, dotted with Ellie's doodles, and weighed down with hand-forged bolts. This is what we're building, she said, pointing. A main garage here for restoration and training. A common hall here for meals, meetings, shelter, A bunkhouse, a veteran's dorm, over here a kid's corner for daughters like Ellie who need a place to feel safe, and eventually, satellite locations across the country. Maxine nodded slowly. You're dreaming big. We have to, Claire said. If we don't, who will? Martin leaned forward. What about ownership? Claire met his eyes. It's yours. He blinked. Claire, no. No strings. The land, the garage, the equipment, it's in your name. You're the anchor. Always were. He didn't answer right away. His voice was quiet when it came. And you? Claire's gaze didn't waver. I'm not leaving. The vote passed unanimously. Wolf's Refuge was no longer a dream. It was alive. The next morning, Ellie asked the question no one expected. Can Claire stay forever? They were in the middle of making waffles, Claire flipping them badly, Martin handling the batter. Martin froze, spatula mid-air. Claire looked at Ellie. What do you mean, sweet pea? I mean like, live here. Like part of us. Not just the Harley. You. Claire's face softened. Martin cleared his throat. That's a big question, Bug. Ellie nodded. I know, but I prayed about it. And Grandma says when your heart feels warm and your toes wiggle, that's God saying yes. Claire burst into quiet laughter. Your toes wiggle, huh? Every time you're here, Ellie said seriously. And when Daddy looks at you. Martin nearly dropped the syrup. Claire placed a hand on Ellie's. Well, my toes wiggle too. That evening, Martin stood under the stars beside the newly framed garage extension. The skeleton of the structure loomed over him like a promise made out of timber. Claire joined him, hands in her coat pockets. You okay? She asked. He nodded. It's just, this place was dying a month ago. And now? He looked around. The laughter. The music from Maxine's old radio. Ellie painting the words, Hope lives here in pink across the side of a wooden beam. Now it's breathing again. Claire stepped closer. I meant what I said. I'm not leaving. Martin looked at her. What if it gets messy? Hard, she shrugged. Then we keep fixing. Like you always say, broken things still run. He hesitated, then reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was a single silver button. Ellie's gift, the one Claire had left behind after the snowstorm. He handed it to her. She stared at it. I kept it, he said. Even when I didn't know your name. Claire blinked back sudden tears. It was always more than just a button, she whispered. Martin stepped closer. So are you. She looked up at him. And in the silence between them filled with firelight and engine hums, children's laughter, and the scent of wood smoke, something unspoken finally settled into place. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. But her hand slipped into his like a gear, locking into its rightful place. Spring came slowly to North Dakota, not in a rush of wildflowers, but in small mercies. The snowbanks melted into stubborn puddles. The wind turned less cruel. A robin perched on the mailbox one morning, as if checking to see if hope had taken up residence. Inside the garage, something was blooming too. Not flowers, but life. Martin was hunched over Claire's panhead, grease on his hands, a fine thread of silver in his beard that hadn't been there a year ago. He worked without rush, methodical, and focused, restoring every bolt, every piston, every memory. Claire leaned against the doorframe arms, crossed, watching him like someone memorizing a painting. You're doing it again, she said softly. Martin didn't look up. Doing what? Fixing her like she's sacred. He glanced at her. She is. Claire stepped closer, running a hand gently along the fuel tank. It gleamed now, not with showroom polish, but with the quiet dignity of something reborn. You're not just rebuilding her, Claire whispered. You're saying goodbye. Martin tightened a bolt and set the wrench down. Not goodbye, he said. Just giving her back. Claire's brow creased. You don't have to. She's yours now, if you want her. Martin stood, wiping his hands on a rag. She was yours before she broke. That means something. Claire looked at him, eyes wide with something unspoken. Then she smiled. Not the public smile she wore as CEO, not the Iron Vixen grin she gave in a fight, but the one she saved for this garage. For him. For Ellie. Outside, Ellie was wobbling down the gravel path on a second-hand bicycle. No training wheels, no hand-holding. Her knees bore the badge of honor all little girls earn, scraped, bruised, but unbothered. Delilah cheered from the porch. You got it. Sugar plum. Eyes ahead, not on the wheels. Maxine sat in a lawn chair with a cup of tea, muttering, kids tougher than half the riders I trained. Ellie reached the garage just as Claire stepped outside. Mama Claire, I did it, she yelled, breathless. Martin raised an eyebrow at the nickname. Claire just smiled. You sure did, Claire said, kneeling to hug her. Like a champ. Ellie's eyes twinkled. Daddy says balance is all in the hips. Claire looked up at Martin. That's funny. Daddy says the same thing about dancing. Delilah cackled. Martin cleared his throat and turned back into the garage. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted everything in shades of gold and copper, Claire wandered out back. She found Martin planting something. He was on one knee, digging a shallow hole in the soft earth just behind the garage wall. What's that? She asked. He looked up a little sheepish. Colorado blue spruce, he said. Got it from a nursery 2 towns over. She smiled and knelt beside him. Why here? He brushed dirt from his hands and leaned back. My dad used to say every place worth keeping should have roots. Claire looked at the sapling. And you want this to stay. I want something to grow where things used to break, he said. Not just engines. People. She didn't answer right away. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny paper pouch. Roses, she said. Dark red. Planted them once with my grandmother. Haven't since. Martin looked at her. She took the trowel and gently pressed the seeds beside the spruce. Rust and roses. That's what this place was made of now. Inside the garage, the panhead sat, gleaming in the evening light. Claire approached it like an old friend. Martin held out a small item wrapped in cloth. She opened it slowly. Inside was a new ignition key, etched with the initials CM and a tiny engraved wolf's paw on the side. Claire looked up. You rebuilt her for me. Martin shrugged. You never stopped riding, just forgot who you were. She held the key tightly. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said. Just ride her like she remembers who you are too. That night, a quiet peace settled over the refuge. The fire pit glowed low. Riders laughed and passed stories like heirlooms. Ellie slept, curled up beside Ghost's enormous dog snoring softly. Claire and Martin sat side by side on the porch, steps, shoulders just brushing. Feels different now, she said. He nodded. Feels earned. She glanced at him. You ever think we'd end up here? Like this, Martin chuckled. Never thought I'd end up with a biker queen, a wolf sanctuary, and a daughter who can rebuild a carburetor before she can spell it. Claire laughed. She's got your stubbornness. She's got your fire, he replied. They sat in silence for a while, watching the moon rise. Then Claire leaned her head gently against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak. But in that quiet, their hearts spoke the same language, not with declarations or grand gestures, but with presence, with healing, with the understanding that some things are better rebuilt together. 6 months later, Wolf's Refuge wasn't just a dream with blueprints anymore. It was a living heartbeat. The garage had tripled in size. The fresh steel beams bore names carved into them. Veterans, riders, kids who'd come through, broken and left standing taller. A new banner fluttered over the front bay doors, hand-stitched by Delilah herself. "You're not too late. You're just in time." Martin stood beneath it one bright morning in late summer, wearing his usual faded flannel and grease-stained jeans. A pair of teenagers, both former runaways, were tightening bolts on a rebuilt 1987 Harley Softail nearby. Ellie, now 7, and officially self-proclaimed junior manager of hope, handed them sockets from a red tray labeled Tools of Healing. Martin didn't hover. He didn't micromanage. He watched, supported, believed. From behind him a voice rang out full of sunshine and sarcasm. "If you smile any wider, your face'll crack." Delilah sauntered up with a clipboard, still somehow managing to balance authority and affection like a tightrope walker. She wore a t-shirt that read, "Bikers bake 2 flour stains fresh." Martin smirked. "Thought you were in the kitchen." "I am," she said. "But someone needs to keep you from turning into a statue." She handed him the clipboard. 14 new applications this week. 6 from vets, 2 from foster kids, and 1 from a retired cop who wants to teach wiring. Oh, and 3 donations came in last night. Martin skimmed the list, eyebrows lifting. "That's something." "It's more than something, Wolf," she said, voice softening. "It's working." He looked around. The garage bays buzzed with life. The bunkhouse roof glinted in the sun. Claire was on the other side of the lot, deep in conversation with a social worker and a welding instructor. Her laugh drifted through the air like music. "Yeah," Martin murmured. "It really is." Later that afternoon, Martin was in his office, a space once cramped and unused, now filled with life. Framed photos lined the shelves, Ellie grinning next to Ghost's dog. Claire, handing keys to a young woman in biker gear, a group shot of the first 5 riders in front of the newly completed sign. Then there was the radio. The old CB still sat on a shelf near the window. Martin hadn't touched it in weeks. It was quiet now, not silent, just waiting. He leaned over and flicked it on. Static. Then is the light on? Wolf Martin smiled and reached for the mic. "It's always on," he said. "Come home?" He leaned back in his chair and stared at the wall. In the corner hung the first ever patch of Wolf's refuge, a fusion of 2 emblems, his old military eagle and the Iron Rider's wings. Side by side. One family. That evening, the garage hosted its first official community dinner. Long tables covered the front lot. String lights swayed gently overhead. Guitars were strummed. Laughter spilled over from every direction. The scent of barbecue and cornbread filled the air like something holy. Martin stood behind the grill flipping burgers, while Ellie painted stars on the cheeks of kids who'd never known birthdays that didn't come with fear. Claire approached with a plate of cookies and her usual steel and silk smile. "Delilah says you're banned from cooking unsupervised." Martin grinned. "Why, because I burned 1, you burned 3. He handed her a plate. "Still the best grill master in 3 counties. She rolled her eyes and stood beside him. "You ever think she asked quietly that all it took was 1 snowstorm?" Martin looked at her. "No," he said. "It took you." And a busted panhead. Claire gave a half laugh, half sigh. "That old girl brought us all back to life, didn't she?" He nodded. She didn't break down. She called for help. They both turned as Ellie ran up cheeks smudged with paint and happiness. She held out a small folded paper. "For you," she said to Claire. Inside was a hand-drawn picture, Claire, Martin, and Ellie standing beneath a huge spruce tree, the one they'd planted in the spring. Beneath it, Ellie had written in bright pink crayon, "Home isn't a place. It's who you fix things with." Claire blinked fast. "Can I stay?" she asked softly. I mean, really stay. Martin bent down, brushed Ellie's hair back, then looked up at Claire. You never left. The night ended with the sound of harmonicas, someone strumming an old country tune, and a sky so wide and full of stars, it looked like it had been repainted. Martin walked Claire to the tree behind the garage. The blue spruce had grown branches fuller, now the rose bush beside it in bloom. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Instead, Martin took her hand, and Claire leaned into his side, her head against his shoulder. Behind them, the garage light glowed through the window. Steady. Soft. All was on. Weeks later, Martin would find a letter taped to the CB radio. No return address. Just 6 words. You built it. We remember. Ghost. Claire stood beside him when he read it. And Martin, a man who once believed he'd lost everything, now understood something deeper. You don't heal alone. You heal by building, by showing up, by leaving the light on for someone else. That light never went out again. Not once. Not for anyone. Because somewhere out there, another rider was still lost in the storm. And now they had a place to come home. Where are you watching from today? We love hearing from folks all over the world. Drop us a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. And if this story touched your heart, even just a little, consider subscribing to the channel. Every new subscriber helps keep the light on for the next soul who needs a little hope, a little healing, or just a good story to remind them they're not alone. From all of us here, thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this journey. We're glad you're here. Until next time, take care. Ride safe and keep the fire burning.